you all for being here. We're very glad to have you. As most of you in the audience are probably aware, it is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and it seems like already criminal hackers are doing their part to make sure that everybody is, as David said, hashtag cyber aware. There have been a lot of breaches already this October, new threats, new companies that have been breached. And here in Washington, if you look at the cybersecurity discussion, you have policymakers who are pointing to existing proposals that have been circulating for years, like cyber threat information sharing as new ways to stop security breaches. But elsewhere in the government, you have some of the country's smartest people who are thinking of new ways, working on new research, on cutting edge technology to come up with different approaches to solve the country's cybersecurity challenges, both for the government and for the military and for the private sector. And I'm very happy that today we'll get to hear from representatives working with on different threats facing all of these areas. So first up, we have Dr. Arati Prabhakar, and she's the director of the Pentagon's Futuristic Research Arm. So why don't we start with telling us just a little bit about what is DARPA and what is the mission?
Great. First of all, thank you very much for the chance to join this discussion. This is one of the areas that we have some big ambitions in, so I'm really happy to have a chance to talk with folks about it. DARPA, I think many people know, is the part of the Defense Department that was created in the wake of Sputnik to avoid that kind of technological surprise. For 6 decades, our mission at DARPA has been to make the pivotal early investments in breakthrough technologies that allow for huge advances in national security. And our history includes, on the military systems side, stealth technology. This will sound like the last conversation, stealth, precision guidance technologies, a lot of the capabilities that are core to how our military fights today. And then historically as well, we've had a long tradition of making investments in core technologies, from advanced materials and advanced microsystems to really all areas of information technology. And those core technologies, we invested for our national security mission, but of course those technologies also, because of their commercial power, drew a huge private investment and have led to all these technologies that have changed how we live and work as well. So that's our history, and then in today's world we're looking forward, same mission, unchanged mission, but of course a very different world that we're living in today.
Right, and so DARPA does do a lot of different projects that address broader national security. I've been to your office, there are robots in the lobby, it's pretty cool, and you have underwater, submarine drones and things like that, but recently, the Director of National Intelligence has listed the potential compromise of online systems and digital theft of information, essentially cyber threats, as the biggest threat overall to U.S. national security. So how have you seen DARPA evolve to address the challenges of cyber threats?
Yeah, DARPA's been concerned about security in the information realm really since the very earliest days. And I think this is a challenge that has been with us for a long time. It's a challenge that in some shape or form is going to be with us, I think, into perpetuity. We see it as essential to everything that we care about today. Obviously, it's important for the information environment in which we all operate as consumers or as businesses or as governments, certainly as a military. But, as I look across the DARPA portfolio, in that portfolio you can also see the seeds of what the next generation of military technology is going to look like, the seeds of the new ways that we will interface between the human brain and the rest of the world. And as you think about where military capabilities need to go, where the next generation of core technologies are going to come from, what you see is this fundamental infrastructure of information technology. And it says to me that unless we can get some of the core cyber threats managed, right? We'll never be invulnerable, but we need to get to a place where cybersecurity challenges are managed and we can get on with our lives, because it's essential today, but I think it's going to be even more essential in the information future.
So you mentioned invulnerability, and that's a concept that's been discussed pretty widely by military leaders, and who have said that U.S. military superiority does not extend into cyberspace, that there are advantages that the U.S. military enjoys on the conventional battlefield. Do you think that it is possible for the U.S. to get ahead of other countries in cyberspace, or does the asymmetrical nature of this conflict mean that attackers are always going to have the advantage?
I think you really have to break that question down, because I think even the simple term cyberspace evokes so many different things to so many different people. Let me answer your question maybe in the narrow military context. So in a kinetic warfighting environment, today we know that the cyber domain is a component of that. And it seems very natural that we're going to be prepared, that we need to be preparing for a future in which cyber effects are part of what comes at us, and that we will eventually need to be able to hurl back in a way that's as integrated with kinetic warfighting as managing the electromagnetic spectrum is today, right? I mean, you would never go out into an active conflict without thinking through how you were going to communicate using radio waves, and how you were going to see the adversary using radar, and how you were going to use electronic warfare to shape what they see. And similarly, the way we manage the information environment, that is going to be about command and control and controlling the information environment, I think in the narrow military sense. Now let me take it maybe at the broadest level, because that information realm and cyberspace, of course, extends to, when I use a social networking site to talk to my kid who just went to college, right, on my smartphone, I'm part of that information environment there too. I don't think command and control is going to be the right model for thinking about that, because that's an environment that the richness of it is defined by how many people can interact together, and its very openness is its power. So I think you want to be careful about bringing too narrow a military construct to thinking about that much more comprehensive system.
Yeah, that's interesting. But when you do think about how the U.S. fits into the landscape, there are so many different threats that the U.S. military is facing in cyberspace as well. So, what are some things that the U.S. can do to try to shift that balance and try to get, to gain a similar strategic advantage in cyberspace as it has in perhaps other areas?
Yeah, so the way I like to think about it is, and again, DARPA's goal, lots of people are doing really useful work in cybersecurity. All of us, if you have a network, or even if you're a consumer, you're worrying about cybersecurity and hopefully taking the measures to deal with it. Many others are driving the near-term developments. Our objective at DARPA in cybersecurity is to lay a foundation for technologies that will outpace the growth of the threat. And I think that is a tall order, and it's the kind of thing that isn't going to happen without the kind of high-risk, high-return investment that we make at DARPA. So what does that mean? Well, it means foundations for cybersecurity. Can we take whole classes of vulnerabilities off the table? It also means scale. Can we come up with techniques that don't require us to train more and more thousands of cyber warriors and have them learn arduously learn these very complex skills? Can we find techniques that scale at machine scale and at machine time scales? And I think that idea of foundations and scale is what you'll see across our portfolio, a whole host of individual projects, because there's not a silver bullet, but collectively, that's really, we're trying to create this future where we can all of us enjoy the information revolution and have a reasonable degree of assurance about cybersecurity.
So you mentioned that there's no silver bullet, but can the U.S. military ever be completely hack-proof? Is that a future that we can?
I actually don't think anyone can ever be completely hack-proof. Maybe a much better analogy is actually how biology works, and think about your immune system, right? Because, the kids just went back to school, viruses are flying around. I just was on a long airplane flight yesterday. You're going to be subjected to an environment in which viruses are coming at you, but your body has this robust adaptive system, and you don't always stay well, but most of the time we're actually able to function. And I think that's perhaps a better model.
Interesting. Well, self-healing is actually a theme of one of the programs that DARPA is working on in the cybersecurity space. Can you tell us a little bit about how that concept might apply to cybersecurity, and can computers ever learn to do their own cybersecurity? Yeah,
I think that's one of the directions that we really want to go. Maybe I'll give you a couple of different examples. If you look historically, one of the things that DARPA did in an earlier era was some of the basic research that led to something that is now part of keeping every operating system pretty much in the world secure. It's incarnated today as address space layout randomization. Essentially, it randomizes under the hood, so an attacker coming in to your system doesn't get this marvelous return on investment where their one attack gets absolutely everything because of the diversity that's been created. Again, an analogy maybe to biology there. So that was a historical result that I think has gone out in the world world and has added to the degree of cybersecurity we currently have. A more recent program at DARPA called CRASH has been working on how do you scale those techniques to cover more and more of the kinds of software systems that are out there. And some interesting transitions are starting from that as well. I think that's going to be one piece of the puzzle.
Interesting. So on the CRASH program too, I mean, that gets at another issue because as everything grows more connected, our consumers are going to actually have to be responsible for downloading security updates, not just to their computers, but to their cars and their toasters. And I mean, is there a way that some of these programs could prevent that from being the future?
Yeah, let me give you two examples of how I think we can start getting past that, because I think that's not exactly what's not scalable, what you described. One is a program called Hack'ems that focused on the issue for embedded systems. Today, companies like Jeep have been recalling vehicles because of the vulnerabilities that they have to being attacked from outside. It turns out that that's been known for years. It was, I think, around 2010 that some of the original research was done that showed the world that, in fact, cars, as an example, were extremely vulnerable. DARPA, provoked by that early research that others had done, started a program that asked the question, can we scale formal methods to the point that they could be useful for operating systems, tens of thousands of lines of code, not massive, not your entire system, but for an embedded OS, could we scale formal methods so that you could have embedded systems for the Internet of Things, for automobiles, for UAVs, for all the embedded processors we care about in the military? Could we build those OSs in a way that they were mathematically provably correct, and therefore not hackable for specified security properties? A bold goal a few years ago, very recently, we just had a great demonstration where a system designed around a secure microkernel using these formal methods was put into a Little Bird helicopter, an unmanned Little Bird helicopter, and that system was successfully flown, but even better, the red team that was trying to attack that Little Bird normally would have had no trouble at all getting in, but because, even though they had all the source code, because of the way that microkernel inside was constructed, they were unable to take control of that system. So it doesn't solve everything, but that's what I have in mind when I say a foundation for cybersecurity. So that would be one example.
So something like that in the car hacking scenario, that could be something that would, just for very critical pieces of technology that people use in their everyday lives, building something that's just unhackable. Is that how you see that transition?
Yeah, exactly. And to be very specific, both the publications but also now source code is available through the DARPA Open Catalog. And for any of you who are here from companies, please just go to the DARPA Open Catalog. You can search for Hack'ems, HACMS, for that specific program, and anything you find there, I hope it's useful to you. We have seen some signs of companies that are starting now to adopt these methods, and so it'll seek out.
Any companies you want to mention?
I don't know what's public, so I won't. But I'm encouraged by a couple of early things I'm seeing.
And so it does bring up some interesting questions about the Internet of Things too, because you have smartwatches tracking people's movements, and you have smart refrigerators and internet-connected baby monitors, and who knows really what is next on this frontier. But it seems like a lot of these devices are already being built without security in mind. So what are the consequences of having billions of devices connected with insufficient security?
I think they're horrible. I think the Internet of Things is either going to figure out security and we will get all of the benefits that people are imagining, or it's going to be really painful. And I think the difference is, this is an important time because, we're still, I think, at that knee in the curve, and I think the explosive growth is still ahead. So my hope is that we will start coming up with better security methodologies now and just weave them in.
So what is DARPA's role in trying to transition some of this very cutting-edge technology that's designed for the military into the private sector? The IoT, you're mentioning this big boom coming. It seems like a lot of these concepts would be very useful to companies that are trying to think about security.
Yeah.
So how, you mentioned open source. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that and some other ways that you're trying to get the word out so that these technologies can be adopted by the private sector.
Yeah, and so this is a really critical point, because for us to go from our R&D investments to national security impact, which is why we come to work in the morning. Many, many times, cybersecurity is a great example, but in many of our programs, the path from research to impact is through commercialization. Here for a couple of reasons. One, because the military buys, if you look at the military's use of information technology over and over and over again, you will find commercial technology. And in fact, I think a greater embrace of commercial technology is going to be necessary even in core military platforms, right?
So it goes both ways.
So we need to draw from the commercial sector as a department, and that's one of the reasons that we want to make sure our tools and techniques get out into the commercial base. The other is more broadly, I mean, national security is more than just what the military does, and so from a national perspective, I think it's for our economy and for our consumers, for all of us as individuals, it's also important to get it out. So yeah, sometimes the answer, often in software programs, the answer is making the tools open source and just getting things out in the world. Sometimes the companies who are doing the research projects will commercialize them. Sometimes it's a university. One of the crash performers was Columbia University. And the team there spun off a company called Red Balloon, which had a wonderful win recently where their technology is now embedded in HP printers to give much greater security for those kinds of devices. So, there's not a single recipe, but I think all of those mechanisms are key to us.
Interesting. So do you think that the military's approach and the private sector's approach has to be more similar in today's age, because private companies are saying how nation states are also targeting them, and I'm sure defense contractors also face those same threats as the U.S. government or U.S. military does as well. I mean, how do you think that the approach to tackling these threats has to change to adapt to these threats becoming much more sophisticated?
I think this is a great example where I think there are many more shared interests than otherwise, and between commercial industry and the Defense Department and the defense industrial base. I think we're all seeing a lot of the same problems. I don't think we're yet working together as closely as we might, and for a lot of good reasons. That people are always concerned about the kind of information sharing that would allow us all, I think, to see the threat environment more clearly. So I think there's more work yet to be done, but the interests are very shared.
What's one thing that the government could do to increase that kind of sharing to have everybody make the same kind of progress?
Well, you mentioned things that are being considered in legislation, and so I think in the near term it's going to be much more about policy and there are industry groups, but also industry and government interactions. On the research side, one of the concerns that we've been trying to address with a new research program is this issue that if we could share more of our network data with confidence that it would only be shared to look for cyber vulnerabilities and that competitors wouldn't be revealing proprietary information to each other. That's symbolic of, I think, this much bigger problem. We live in this era of vast data. And yet, as consumers or companies or as governments, there's always this concern. What is it going to cost me to get the value of all that big data? If I allow you to look at my data, how will I know that I still get to have control over it? And I think that lies at the core of a lot of these really tough conundrums that we're dealing with. So a new program at DARPA today is called Brandeis. Its objective is to create the privacy technologies that would allow for the owners of data to exercise greater agency over that data. So for example, imagine if you were a consumer and you could agree to have your health data shared, but only for specified purposes, only for specified times, only to specified individuals or organizations, and you could have confidence that that's the only way it was being used.
So do you see this as a tech solution to one of these policy questions that's being debated on the Hill?
I think that is my hope and ambition. We're at the beginning, and I think solution, I want to be careful. It's not going to be a magic wand that we wave, but I think it could change this really painful trade-off we have right now between privacy and security. I think it could be very constructive there.
Interesting. So another theme that you hear a lot of companies talking about these days, and I know DARPA is working on as well, is cyber threat visualization. And a few months ago, we had some of your DARPA colleagues come and give a talk about Plan X, a program to give people greater visibility into the military's networks and show cyber threats as they come over, attacks, and maybe something would explode on the screen and make it a lot easier to tell if it's an attack than just reading through lines of code.
Right.
So how do you see making cyber defense more intuitive and simpler? And that seems like it's also a workforce challenge as well. I mean, you're talking about beefing up the military cyber forces by quite a lot, and there's this big workforce shortage and competition for talent. So, I mean, do you see technology also going towards some of those other policy goals?
Yeah, no, I think this is, I think you really hit it. Plan X started from the understanding that part of why cyber is such a difficult challenge, whether you're thinking about it from a tactical military perspective or whether you're thinking about it from a strategic national perspective, one of the things that makes it hard is that it's abstract and arcane, and people speak, it's like they're talking dolphin to you, right? I mean, people are trying to tell you the technical pieces in it. So how do you translate that complex, abstract, obscure environment into something that people can visualize so that they can understand what's going on, into an environment in which people can plan to take actions, can model and simulate and see what the results might be, can trade off choices about how to operate in that environment, and then when you know what you want to do, can become the environment through which you actually execute those actions. So Plan X started as that foundational cyber warfare platform technology, and today we're finding examples ranging from the Army having a great interest in using it. Think about a very tactical environment as our soldiers, the next urban war fighting environment that they're going to find themselves in. I think it's a reasonable guess that they will be facing cyber attacks as they're walking through that environment, but they might also be able to, through a Plan X kind of capability, to in real time visualize the cyber environment around them and be aware, for example, of a Wi-Fi router that has been previously implicated in an IED attack, that a level of intelligence about their environment that I think really hadn't been possible before.
Right.
So that might be an interesting starting example of where something like Plan X can make a big difference.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the whole process of that is arcane, and it's also very difficult to teach people how to recognize when they're being attacked when you're just looking at data rather than having something that's more intuitive that Plan X would provide. And it strikes me that you have this cybersecurity workforce shortage right now, and everybody in the private sector and in the military is struggling to fill that gap. But is that enough? Because by the time that the workforce gap is filled, it seems like there will be a whole range of new threats and new technologies and more things connected to the internet that we haven't even thought of today.
That's exactly right. And so this is the other thing, is part of the reason I think especially for leadership and for policy people, part of the problem in cyberspace is it's not as if it's a stable environment and if you just catch up, you'll be okay. You're trying to catch up on this incredibly steep curve as the information environment keeps getting bigger and bigger, which we want for all the good things it brings, but of course it brings more and more attack surface. So again, back to this idea of scale, I think you're right. I think we do need, today we need to be hiring lots of people, training them, and patching and praying, because that's what we've got, and at least let's do that, right? That's not going to get us the kind of scale that we need for the future. One of our next big grand challenges at DARPA, we've had a couple recently in the robotics area. The next one is going to be a cyber grand challenge. And what it aims to do is encourage the development of machines, of computers that can do what is today currently done through human reasoning, which is looking at your network, looking at your systems, looking for penetrations and looking for vulnerabilities, a process that's lots of human beings over many, many months typically to figure out what's actually where the problems are in the network, and then writing the patches. As it turns out, machines don't know how to do this yet. But we think our premise is, and I think it's starting to play out, that if machines can start learning these things that are currently human reasoning, that they will learn very rapidly, that they'll be able to share, and they'll be able to scale in a way that human talent really won't, to be able to keep up with this. So all of that culminates in a competition next August. It's the day before DEF CON, and it's essentially capture the flag, but a league of their own for machines to play their own capture the flag against each other.
Who do you think is going to win?
A machine. We have 7 groups who have qualified to compete in that, and it's really been cool to watch because it's some amazing academic talent and amazing hackers, and so you have sort of the tactics and the deep math coming together, and I don't know which of them will win, but I think it's going to be, I can't wait. I think it's going to be a really interesting competition. So that, by the way, that's open to the public, and I hope everyone will come.
And so I want to shift over to this idea of consumers and their role in cybersecurity too. I mean, how do you incentivize people and companies to start factoring in security as part of their buying decisions or building decisions? Yeah,
I really think the important word that you said was about incentives. And this is something I've been worrying about, and I'd actually be very interested in people's thoughts about it. My observation today would be that for people, for companies, certainly for governments and for the military, we all know what the cost is for cybersecurity. We know what it costs in terms of the cost to buy a product, the overhead it's going to be to have it. I mean, certainly those of us who live within the rules of security for information systems in the Defense Department, every single day we face the frustration of how slow and how clunky it is to operate there versus doing Gmail out in the open, right? So we know what the pain is. What we don't know is what the risk is if we don't pay that cost for cybersecurity. And it's this looming threat. I mean, it might be a horrible thing like OPM or Sony or Target. On the other hand, you might be okay, and no one really knows how to assess that. And as a consequence, it seems to me that today cybersecurity is a matter of top-down regulation, policy, rules and requirements. It's something that boards worry about in companies, as opposed to really an economic decision that's just sort of naturally made in the course of doing whatever business you're in. And I think it's going to not really. I think all these great technologies are not going to scale, are not going to get adopted as widely as they really need to be, until we start figuring out what the economics of cybersecurity is going to be, and from that, I think, allow an insurance market to flourish, because that's the infrastructure that allows that kind of risk management in so many other areas. So I don't know yet, but I think that's a direction that the whole field needs to start moving in.
So you think money will talk in this, that it's not going to be
consumers?
I think
money always talks. Yeah, and I mean, consumers are arguably a little bit of a different story, right? I mean, I do Gmail, and I have traded some of my privacy in return for that convenience, and I know I have some vulnerabilities, but so we make some different personal trade-offs. But I think especially for companies and for governments, the economics are going to have to be there.
Interesting. So I do want to ask you one more question about, you mentioned how difficult it can be to use some of the tools, and one of the more difficult, increasingly difficult tasks in cybersecurity is a password, but because we all have so many accounts online, and they're also, no matter how strong they are, they're also the weakest form of security. So I mean, what do you see as the future of passwords, and what is DARPA doing to address this authentication question?
Yeah, I think no one would weep if passwords went away, and in fact, I think two-factor authentication is an important sort of today capability that lots of people have and are implementing. But really, a question we've been asking for the last few years is, can we get past those kinds of techniques? One of our programs in that area is active authentication, and it explored a whole host of other techniques that might authenticate a specific individual. One example was how somebody types, or their usage of words, which would both be a way to ascertain that it is the individual it's supposed to be to start with, but then would also give you ongoing authentication. And so some of that research, I think, has bubbled out into the world as well.
Well, so with that, I want to open it up to the audience for questions. If you could please raise your hand and say where you're from before asking your question, and we will have a mic coming around your way as well. Anyone want to kick us off? We have one in the front row over here.
Yeah, good morning, or afternoon. I'm Paul Carnival from Northrop Grumman. What are your views on how policy and legislation would influence the direction of technology solutions? And such that if one were to say, so we're stymied in trying to conduct cybersecurity research when we're limited to how we could access data sets and use the network and so forth. So there's some belief that maybe some of the policies and legislation lag the technology, so we're really trying to do new technologies in the presence of old policy. So what's your views on that?
Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert on the policy side of these issues, and I think that they are numerous, and they're very important, because we technologists can do all of our stuff, but it won't really matter unless some of those issues get solved. I think it's natural that policies are going to lag where the technology is, because technology is nimble, and especially in this area, it's being driven by myriad different people and organizations. And policy is, of course, supposed to be something that's contemplative and draws a lot of people together and thinks things through. So I think almost by design it's going to be behind the curve in that sense. And that in itself isn't bad, but I think it might be worth really giving consideration to how to create policies that are able to keep up with the progression of technology rather than designing them for one static point. I don't know quite how that works, but I think that might be helpful. I don't know the answer about how policy will constrain or stem or move, change the flow of technology. But I suspect that's already the case in what goes on today. I think one interesting example is that from a technology point of view, defense and offense are indistinguishable, and the technical basis for understanding your vulnerabilities is precisely the same as the technical basis for understanding how you might attack a system. And yet, of course, from a policy perspective, those are two, that's a black and white kind of distinction. And so I think in that sense it does already shape the way technologists approach the problem.
Yes, right in the center.
Hi, Sharon Bogat, Voice of a Moderate. First, I want to thank you because I have a very rough writing style, and I was told that I cannot use an editor because they like to see my pattern to know that it's coming from me and not someone, pretending to be me. So that totally explains that. And I have a question about grocery stores and the discount cards and all that security. When we look at that for the average people, they're willing to give away some of their data to get 20% off or buy one, get one free. But I was told to not do that because then people could know when I'm sick or when I'm a little bit vulnerable. What is the opinion of DARPA? But actually, how can we solve that issue, that our data is not out there and it cannot be then targeted, and then people make more out of it than might what really be? I could be buying aspirin for someone else, who knows? So just curious about that issue.
Yeah, I think that is yet another example of this issue that we know there's value in our data. And we want that value, whether it's commercial value or other kinds of value. But we want that value, but we don't want our data to be used for things that we didn't intend. And so I think, to me, that your question comes right back to this issue of agency over our data. And I don't think that I'm not aware of very good solutions today. Largely, I think the only way to manage that today is in user agreements or the contract that you have with a business or through policies. My hope is that with the privacy technologies that we're starting now to investigate with our new program, Brandeis, that there will be a future where there's a better answer for your question.
We have a couple questions in the second row here. We're going to go here and then there.
Hi, my name is Jaya Baloo. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of a Royal Dutch telecommunications company. And we don't hear a lot about DARPA in the Netherlands, but a few weeks ago there was an article on the Dutch news radio about the use of intelligent augmentation to plant chips into soldiers' brains to drill with post-traumatic stress. Are you doing more with intelligent augmentation, and how is that going?
Yeah, we have a robust portfolio in neurotechnology. We're actually not implanting chips in soldiers' brains, contrary to reports to that effect. So, in the spectrum of work that we're doing at DARPA, one area that I think is going to be very critical to the future of national security is in the biological technologies, because as biology is intersecting with physical science and engineering and with information technology, always back to information technology, what's happening in research there is so vibrant and so interesting, and some of those research areas are going to create huge technological surprises that do matter for national security. In pursuit of driving some of those technologies, we recently created a biological technologies office, and its work includes synthetic biology, work to try to nip infectious disease in the bud. But one major area of investment is neurotechnology. And in fact, the challenges that our wounded warriors face coming back from theater was a major inspiration for our neurotechnology portfolio. Some of that work, for example, was about revolutionizing prosthetics and creating a much more agile, adept prosthetic arm, but also understanding signaling from the motor cortex. What are the neural signals that I'm sending to move my arm, and can we pick those signals up and in fact translate those codes into motions for this prosthetic arm? And in fact, that work culminated in some beautiful research about 3 years ago, where the first human volunteer, a woman named Jan, who had been paralyzed for 15 years, she had surgical tiny little arrays placed on her motor cortex to pick up her neural signaling, and in fact she was able, with a startlingly small amount of training, she was able to think and control this prosthetic arm. So, under FDA approval for research, onesie, twosie kinds of individuals are doing this in carefully controlled lab settings, and we are very far from therapeutic options from that work. But even so, I think the power of neurotechnology, as we start to understand the brain and we start to understand how it codes information and how it interacts with the rest of the world, a very interesting door is opening. And in my view, it is not a door to rush through, it is a door to think deeply about and to make some very carefully thought through choices about what areas of research to pursue. I think we're many years from these things being part of our lives, but I do think it's going to come, because I think as that mystery of the brain gets unraveled, the power of what we're going to be able to do to restore function, and then in some future also to enhance function, I think we as human beings will not be able to resist what it's going to do for us.
Interesting. And so, yes, we had one over in the corner.
Good afternoon, Ulrich Saddelsnacht. I'm from Belgium. I run an IT security cluster from European companies and research. I'm very intrigued by the expectations that you have, and thank you very much for sharing them. The machine learning aspect is what really interests me in fighting cybersecurity. I wonder what sort of researchers that you see that would need to apply to, for instance, the challenge that you pose to them. Artificial intelligence is a major challenge. As you rightfully put it, most of the people are today coming from information technologies and computer scientists. So how do you see, which other research domains do you see that need to work on this in collaboration basically with IT security? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful question. One of the things I find is that our program methodology at DARPA is a program manager will put out, well, first we'll go understand what's technically possible, what the hardest problems are. We'll bring his or her own technical background and experience to the table. But to define a program at DARPA, that program manager starts by creating an objective that is something that usually everyone says, are you kidding? That's crazy. It's a really hard, dazzlingly hard objective that if we could do it would really make a difference. One example might be scalable cybersecurity because machines can do this kind of human reasoning for cyber defense. So when we put that goal out there, many times in order to achieve that goal, it's going to require people from very different technical backgrounds to come together. And I can't remember a time when DARPA ever funded an interdisciplinary program. We don't really use that language, but over and over again, because you have to work across disciplines and share ideas from very different perspectives in order to reach that goal, I think we end up doing some of the most interesting interdisciplinary research as a consequence of that. And the area that you highlighted, I think, is a terrific example. But machine learning, I think, if you think about all the areas that machine learning is used today, I would say it flourishes most readily in the information environment because it's its natural home in some ways. But what we're able to do there, I think, is still only in its earliest stages. Another program at DARPA is called Probabilistic Programming for Advanced Machine Learning. Its premise is if we can start to develop the languages and the tools for machine learning, that will open the capabilities of machine learning to people in all kinds of other fields. They won't have to also go become expert in machine learning itself because it'll become a much more widely used tool. So I hope that will help in this area as well as many others.
Great. We're going to go to Chris over there in the middle.
Hi, Dr. Chris Castelli with Inside Cybersecurity. Good to see you. We published a story this week about the agency's new effort to rate the cybersecurity of software. You've just awarded a grant to Mudge, former DARPA employee. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the value you see in that effort.
Someone asked me about this at a meeting yesterday, and I actually didn't know we had done that with Mudge, but in addition to the roughly 200 programs at DARPA that go through a formal process and that I know about and I sign off on, by design, we allow our program managers to do smaller seedling projects, and I later learned that that's one of our smaller seedling projects. That's sort of cool. We're doing something with Mudge I didn't know about. I don't really know in detail about that project, but my understanding is that the objective is to try to rate cybersecurity tools or products and create a little bit better understanding about what their capabilities are. To me, that's potentially could be a very important part of this notion of the emergence of a robust economic model for cybersecurity and insurance and the other products that might go with that. So, I hope it'll make a contribution in that area.
And yes, we have one on the other side over here. And then we'll go to Patrick. I think that's all we have time for.
Hi, Dr. Prabhakar. Thanks for being here and talking to us today. My name is Will Carter. I'm from CSIS. And I just wanted to ask, in your area in fundamental research, if you were to identify the most game-changing new technology that is at an early stage of development for security, and then the most game-changing new technology for how we interact with the internet, what technologies would you point to?
Well, let me ask a couple of questions. Do you mean cybersecurity or do you mean security?
Cybersecurity in this case.
I think I'm struggling with your question because I so adamantly don't believe that there's a silver bullet. There's one thing that's going to just be the big game changer. I think it's going to be a number of, the information environment is just too vast for any one area. I think it is going to come from, first of all, always looking out ahead at where threats are going. So I talked about the work in our HACMS program on embedded systems. I think 4 or 5 years ago when DARPA started that program, I don't think anyone was really thinking about security for the Internet of Things or for embedded systems. So I think it's very important that we be thinking in those terms out ahead of where the threat is. As an example, one of our more recent programs, STACK, is focused on algorithmic vulnerability. So again, thinking out, like if you were the attacker, what would you be thinking about next as cybersecurity does get better? So maybe it's back to this idea of pace and making sure that we're always working out ahead, and then again working on foundations and scalable things rather than another big box of Band-Aids.
And yes, Patrick Tucker over there, hiding in the corner.
Cool, thanks. Patrick Tucker, Defense One. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and Michael Rogers, Admiral Michael Rogers, the commander of Cyber Command, both testified at the Hill recently and talked about their fears for future vulnerabilities, and they both highlighted data manipulation as opposed to just data theft, like actually going into networks, going into databases, changing the values, the effects that could have as the area of vulnerability that they're both particularly concerned with. It strikes me as something that's very different from traditional data theft, believing. It's a little bit harder, and the resiliency is also more difficult. How do you see that as being a different type of cyber vulnerability to protect against, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The research that triggered our HACMS program back in 2010 was work that hacked a car speedometer, and there's this now, I think, almost an iconic photograph of a car speedometer where the car's driving, it says you're going 140 miles an hour, you're in park, which is a little odd, and then instead of telling you what the temperature is, it says pwned by car shark. It's a marvelous picture. And about 1.5 years ago, I shared that with General Dempsey when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and it really stayed with me how he responded to that, because his reaction was just what you said, Patrick. He said, it's one thing if my system I can figure out how to deal with that. But it's a different thing altogether if I can't trust what my systems are telling me. And I think that is it is even more worrisome in some ways. I don't know that it's a different class of problems, because I think at the end of the day it really comes down to, to me it's just part of this whole integrated system of how do we protect our systems and how do we protect our data, how do we generate and use data with confidence in its integrity and robustness, and how do we share it with agency over it. So I think it's part of the hall of horrors, but I'm not sure it's actually a different class of problems.
Great. And with that, thank you so much
Thank
for joining
you.
us. Very glad to have you.
Thanks so much, Sarah.